It feels like lately, with online media, things are changing so rapidly. Like, you wake up and suddenly the whole landscape is different.
Yeah.
You might be noticing some shifts. And honestly, we have been too. We've been looking into some changes, particularly with like left-leaning media outlets that have definitely caught our attention.
Oh, yeah, it's really a dynamic landscape, wouldn't you
Yeah,
say?
absolutely.
And for this deep dive, we're focusing on some of the recent departures and just kind of like transformations that we've seen at these outlets.
Exactly.
And to help us break it all down, we've been looking at a recent YouTube video from the Ring of Fire. Their perspective is really insightful. It helps us try to dig down into what's driving these changes.
Yeah, and specifically, our core material today is actually the transcript from their video.
Okay.
It's titled, Liberal World Loses Ideological Reporters and Advertisers.
Ooh, a very pointed title. So what's our, mission for today's deep dive? What are we hoping to uncover?
Basically, we want to cut through the noise and understand the factors that this video highlights as the reasons behind these shakeups.
Okay.
Give you a clear, insightful overview of what's going on and, crucially, what it might tell us about the bigger picture of how media is evolving.
Got it.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. So where do we start? What's the main takeaway, the central argument from this Ring of Fire video?
Okay, so the core argument they put forth is that we're seeing these commentators, writers being let go, particularly liberal ones, because the online space is so saturated.
Okay, just too many voices out there.
Right. And then on top of that, you have advertisers who are increasingly worried about alienating parts of their audience.
Right, they want to play it safe.
Right, exactly. And then there's this growing sense that maybe the public is just tired of hearing exclusively liberal viewpoints.
Interesting. They actually use the term topsy-turvy to describe this whole situation.
Right, topsy-turvy.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice of words, right? So when they're talking about this tired of it phenomenon, is that a uniquely liberal media problem, do you think?
That's what I was wondering.
If people were really just exhausted with one singular viewpoint, wouldn't we expect to see similar shakeups across the entire media spectrum?
Yeah, exactly. If you think about it, outlets on the right, Fox News, Daily Caller, Breitbart, these are all very ideologically specific.
Right, absolutely. So it's not like this whole idea of catering to a specific audience is unique to the left.
Not at all.
So it makes you think, doesn't it? Is it really just that people are tired of it, or is there something more nuanced happening here?
Right, and it's not like someone tuning into one of those outlets is looking for a diverse, broad spectrum of perspectives.
Exactly. They're going there for a particular reason.
Right, so maybe it's more about, the level of reliance or even the type of engagement with ideologically aligned media that differs, depending on where you fall on that spectrum.
That's a really good point. Does the video itself say anything about that?
Well, it does. Actually, they bring up this idea that maybe those on the right have a far more reliant relationship with right-wing media compared to how those on the left engage with left-wing media.
Okay.
So the thought is that maybe some on the left are more inclined, towards independent thought and less dependent on these commentators to shape their opinions.
Interesting. It tracks with some of the broader trends and observations about how different groups consume media. We've definitely seen research pointing to these kinds of differences.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what else does this video highlight as a potential factor?
Okay, so they talk about this weird phenomenon that happened after an election defeat.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Apparently there was a huge noticeable drop in viewership and engagement with left-leaning outlets.
Oh, wow. Like a significant dip.
Significant, yeah. And the explanation they give is really fascinating. It's not just about, disappointment with the election outcome, but a deeper sense of disillusionment.
So people were just kind of checking out.
Yeah, almost opting out of the news cycle completely.
That's really interesting. I mean, if we think about it in terms of media psychology, it kind of makes sense.
Right.
If you're really invested in a particular outcome and then it doesn't go your way, it can lead to this burnout.
Emotional exhaustion.
Exactly. Or even just a desire to avoid anything that might make you feel worse.
Right.
And the video actually points to this immediate decline in numbers on platforms like YouTube. It really highlights just how, connected people feel to their news sources.
And how these political events can just totally rock the boat.
Right,
And
exactly.
it raises questions about the resilience of those media models that are so closely tied to specific political cycles.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like what happens when that cycle ends or when it doesn't go the way you expect. Right.
So, okay, we've got the saturation, we've got this post-election fatigue.
Yeah.
What else is at play here?
Well, they talk about advertisers and the difficulties that some of these outlets are facing when it comes to like attracting them.
Oh, right, because advertising is the lifeblood of so many media organizations.
Exact.
So what kind of challenges are they running into?
They use the example of Air America.
Okay, yeah, I remember Air America.
And they highlight how because Air America was so critical in their reporting on corporations, it made it almost impossible to get those corporations to advertise with them.
That's a tough position to be in. Like you're trying to uphold certain journalistic standards, but it's directly impacting your ability to, stay afloat.
Exactly. And they had a roster of like big name liberal commentators, but even that wasn't enough to like bridge the gap.
It's a really stark example of the tension that can exist between, your ideals and the practical realities of running a media business. Right. And it's not like this is a new problem either. Like I remember even back in, I think it's like 2008, 2009, I was doing some critical reporting on a few big corporations. And we had a real hard time securing advertisers for that series.
Oh, wow. So you've experienced this firsthand.
Oh, yeah. And the video actually contrasts Air America with what they perceive to be a different approach by HuffPost in terms of revenue.
Okay, interesting.
And they even bring up Vox as an example of a platform that might be facing scrutiny from advertisers because of its willingness to engage in critical corporate coverage.
Mm.
So it's clearly not just like a blanket rejection of liberal viewpoints by advertisers. It's more complex than that.
It's a nuanced situation for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so, these outlets are facing some tough challenges. What about the individuals themselves, the commentators and writers who have been let go? What does the video say about them?
Oh, they don't hold back. They
Yeah.
take a very direct stance. They basically suggest that a lot of these commentators have like devolved into myopic ideologues.
Whoa, strong words.
Yeah. And in their view, they've stopped functioning as, objective journalists.
So they're saying that they've essentially become too entrenched in one particular viewpoint.
Exactly. And there's this really blunt quote in the video. It says, "You're not a damn victim. You chose to take that path of myopic ideology."
Oh, wow. Okay. So they're placing the responsibility squarely on these individuals.
Yeah, the argument is that they brought this on themselves by, becoming unwilling to consider other perspectives.
It's interesting because it really highlights this whole debate about the role of personal ideology in media,
Right.
What are the expectations that we have for people who are presenting themselves as journalists or commentators? Where do we draw the line between informed opinion and just like unwavering adherence to a specific ideology?
And who gets to draw that line?
Exactly. That's a really, really crucial question.
It is. And, the video goes even further. They actually say that traditional media, newspapers, websites, cable news, as we know them, are dying mediums.
Dying mediums. That's a bold statement.
It is, right. But
Yeah.
their argument is that the way people get their news is changing rapidly, and it's shifting toward these platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and even podcasts.
Well, they're not wrong about that, right? I mean, look at how we're consuming information right now.
Exactly. So what do you think, what are the implications of that shift?
Well, I think the video makes a really compelling point about the sheer diversity of content that's available on these newer platforms.
Yeah.
It's not just the same old voices and perspectives being recycled over and over again.
Yeah.
And the idea is that this range of voices might actually empower individuals to, develop more nuanced understandings of issues.
That form their own conclusions.
Exactly, because they're being exposed to a wider spectrum of viewpoints than they might encounter in more traditional outlets.
Right, which are often, as you said earlier, ideologically siloed.
Exactly. And it kind of challenges this whole narrative of, a monolithic liberal media or conservative media.
Right, like maybe those categories breaking down.
Yeah, I think there's a more fragmented and potentially, a more diverse information ecosystem emerging.
Absolutely.
Okay, so given all of this, what does the video suggest moving forward? Do they think these commentators should be rehired?
Actually, the speaker in the video is pretty clear that they wouldn't rehire them.
Really? So they're pretty set in their assessment.
Yeah, they see them as having become too ideologically rigid.
Okay.
But then they make this interesting point to praise a specific progressive commentator. And it's pretty clear they're referring to the host of the Ring of Fire.
Okay.
And they praise this person for not being a one-trick pony.
Okay, so they're able to, like, step outside of their usual lane.
Exactly. And they even cite examples where this commentator has, praised actions taken by Trump, like the banning of bump stocks and the pharmaceutical price disclosure rule.
Wow. Okay, so even though they might disagree with him on a lot of issues, they're still willing to acknowledge when he does something they agree with.
Right. Exactly.
And why do you think they highlight those specific instances?
I think it's because they're trying to draw a distinction between, like, inflexible ideological adherence and a more pragmatic issue-by-issue evaluation.
Got it. So it's not just about blindly agreeing or disagreeing with everything. It's about being able to assess each situation on its own merits.
Right, exactly. And they see that as a crucial characteristic of a commentator who isn't just operating in an echo chamber.
Yeah, it suggests that, engaging with different perspectives, even if ultimately you come down on a different side, is a really valuable quality.
Absolutely. And I think that leads perfectly into the last concept they bring up, which is this idea of a blue bubble.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that term before. What do they mean by that in this context?
So the idea is that liberals may have, to some extent, existed within a relatively isolated information environment, mostly consuming and sharing information with like-minded individuals.
Okay, so their own little bubble.
Right. And now that bubble has either burst or exploded,
Yeah.
forcing a reckoning of sorts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how does that idea connect with some of the other stuff we've been talking about, like the post-election dip and the whole myopic ideology thing?
Right. Well, if we think about it, a reliance on that kind of closed information loop could lead to, like, disconnects from broader public sentiment.
Right, because you're not really exposed to alternative viewpoints or, even critical feedback.
Exactly. And it could also lead to an inability to adapt when that perspective is challenged.
Which is essentially what happened after the election.
Right. So the bursting of this bubble, as the video describes it, could have contributed to both the decline in audience engagement and a reevaluation of those commentators who were seen as, like, reinforcing that internally focused viewpoint.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like the bubble protected them for a while, but once it burst, they were kind of left exposed.
Exactly. So to kind of sum up the main arguments from the video and what we've been discussing, they're saying that these firings in liberal media are driven by a mix of things: market saturation, advertiser caution, and a public that's just kind of weary of these exclusively liberal viewpoints, especially when they're coming from commentators who seem, overly ideological.
Okay, that's a pretty good summary.
And we've also talked about whether that fatigue is unique to liberal media, how different audiences engage with ideologically aligned content, the post-election drop in viewership, the challenges of attracting advertisers for certain types of reporting, the critique of myopic ideologues, the move towards these newer platforms, the value of commentators who can step outside their lane, and of course, this whole blue bubble concept.
Phew, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
And what I find really thought-provoking is that the video ends by asking this question: where do these people go?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Like, they acknowledge that a lot of people have lost their positions, but they don't really offer an answer.
Right. It's left open-ended.
Yeah, and it makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what happens to these individuals? What happens to the media landscape as a whole?
Absolutely. And it brings us to our final thought for you. Considering everything we've talked about, the changes in the media landscape, the pressures on traditional outlets, the rise of these new platforms, the whole debate about ideology and objectivity, what does this tell you about how we consume information and form our opinions?
Yeah, it's a big question.
It is. And we encourage you to think about the balance between seeking out information that aligns with your existing views and engaging with a broader spectrum of analysis, as you navigate the media you choose to consume.
Right. It's all about finding that balance.
Exactly. It's a conversation that's always evolving, and your choices as a media consumer actually play a huge role in shaping that evolution.
Well said.
So, yeah, lots to think about.
Definitely.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.